Alright, today I will be speaking to you on something that's a fairly common topic and has been since the invention of video games, really. And that's the effect that violent video games have on children and adolescents since. And it's been a major concern of parents and professionals since the invention of the first violent video game, which was called Death Race, which was made in 1976. Now, when that game was made, it was really a fairly almost car-shaped blob of pixels that was barely distinguishable as something that could be called violent, which is very distant in comparison to today, which is video games are known for their realism. Now, some of you may be wondering, how has the argument been persisted for so long? It started in 1976, that's what, 40 years? Well, one of the major reasons for the argument being allowed to continue is that despite there being numerous amounts of studies, literally just going into Google, you would find a list of surveys that goes on for days, and studies and research and thought studies, what have you, on the effects that violent video games have on children. And, well, but they are almost constantly contradicting one another. One will say that it ruins a child's brain forever and it causes them to act violently, and the other will find no such conclusion, all the way to the other extreme that find that violent video games actually positively affect children, causing them to have better reaction time and decrease stress by giving them an outlet for anxiety. The main reason that there is so much of a disparity between the differences in these studies is because of biases. Both sides of the argument have strong reasons for wanting to either back the claim that it does and back the claim that it doesn't. Parents don't want their kids playing violent video games because it may, regardless of what studies say, so any means to reduce violent tendencies in children is good from a parent perspective. And from the other side of the argument, it can be said that studies that say that there is no effect or a positive effect has some influence from the gaming industry that obviously want to maintain the market of violent video games. Another reason that the argument continues is the whole argument that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What I mean by that is it's relatively easy to prove that something does exist. You simply just have to show that it exists. I could claim that tables exist, and it's relatively easy to claim that tables exist because there's bunches in the room right now. However, it's harder to say that in the same instance, perfect spheres don't exist, because just because there's not an instance of one to give evidence right now doesn't mean that there's none in existence. So, because there's no conclusive evidence for there being a connection between violent video games and teen violence, the argument persists because the fact that it hasn't been proven, it's difficult to disprove because it's hard to give evidence for something not existing. As I said, there are numerous studies involving the effects of violent video games on teens and children, but they're in direct conflict. So instead, let's look at some statistics. Here I have a graph. This graph graphs the amount of video games, the gray bars, sold annually by year from 1996 to 2007. You'll note a steady increase, while the green bar, the total amount of violent crimes to occur in said year, has remained relatively constant, which kind of throws a wrench in the claims. However, a pattern does start to become apparent when you remove acts of adult violence from the equation. Here you'll see that when the amount of violent video games sold increased, there was a sharp decrease in the number of violent crimes. Now, I'm not saying that it does have a positive effect, as the chart will imply, because there are some argumentative points like that one there, but that say that it increased when the sale of violent video games increased. But it just proves that there's little to no correlation, especially when there's little to no correlation between the violent crimes of youths and the sale of violent video games. In fact, while violent video game sales have been on a steady rise, there's been a 40% drop in the number of violent crimes perpetrated by teens and children from 1973, which was shortly before the invention of the first violent video games. Okay. Overall, what I'm saying is that it's kind of infuriating that science was perverted to an extreme to back one person's point and used for their own vendetta, and numbers were twisted. So it's really better to look at raw numbers yourself than just listen to what people tell you.